For the past 2 years, we have seen a boom in the number of people in social media moving to New York. But it's time to ask, is it all it's hyped up to be, or are all these influencers glossing over the city's faults in order to make their lives seem better than they really are? Let's find out. Now, in order to answer this question, we are going to be going into the pros and cons of living in the city, starting with the juiciest bit, the cons. The first of which is that your living space is going to suck. New York apartments are often small and oddly shaped. They are noisy. It's also very hard to find a bright living space. A lot of pre-war apartments have very small windows, and even if you do manage to find a south-facing unit, there's a very good chance that that window is going to be covered by another building. And this is a big part of the second con, which is that winter is awful. If you're from the East Coast, you know that winters suck in general, but New York is its own special level of miserable. Since the apartments are so small and so dark, you're gonna have trouble feeling comfortable spending all your time indoors. And if you do want to escape your apartment to meet up with friends or just get out of the house, you're most likely gonna be meeting up at a restaurant or a bar or some other indoor area, which means that you are gonna be spending money and it's gonna cost a lot more since it is in New York City. So there really is no place where you can just kind of exist for free in comfort during the months of December through March, which is a really long part of the year. And to make things worse, one of the best parts of New York for a lot of people, which is its walkability, becomes one of the worst aspects in the winter, because now, since you don't have a car, even if it's snowing, even if it's cold outside, you still are gonna have to trudge through the snow to get to the subway, to get your groceries. And even when it's not winter, basic errands and tasks are just obscenely difficult compared to living anywhere else. Again, you're walking to get groceries, which means you're carrying these heavy bags with you on the sidewalk to get home. A quick trip to Target turns into an entire afternoon, and there's just lines everywhere all the time. If you've ever tried to go to a Trader Joe's in Manhattan, you'll know that the experience is not just going, grabbing your groceries and going to check out. You literally walk in, get in line, and pick up groceries as you go through the aisles because the line is that long. And of course, this can be a pro for some people because you are getting more steps in, you have more time to like listen to a podcast or a new album. But if you are having to deal with that day in and day out, it does get tiresome after a while. Now, another con, which has been a big topic for the past maybe 2 years, is the crime and harassment in the city. It has gotten worse. Fortunately, I have not been a victim of any crimes. I'm very grateful for that, but I know friends who have been just like attacked in the street, who have been yelled at by random strangers. And especially if you are female or a person of color, you are gonna be a bigger target for these behaviors. If you're from a city already, then none of this is going to be that much of a shock to you. But if you do come from a suburban area, be prepared for more catcalling, homeless people on the street, things that you wouldn't usually see back at home. I'm from SF, so I'm used to a lot of chaos and grime, so this doesn't really bother me, but it can understandably be a con for a lot of people. Now, the next con is something that I think could probably be the biggest mental hurdle for a lot of people living in the city, and a really big reason why people tend to get burnt out after their first year, which is just the general sense of FOMO that you have all the time living in New York. And of course, FOMO is not exclusive to New York City. No matter where you live, you're always gonna feel like you are missing out to a certain degree. But because there is so much going on in New York all the time, it doesn't matter how many friends you have, how many cool parties you go to, you will only ever barely scratch the surface of what the city has to offer. And that's really hard for a lot of people to grasp with. And if you come to the city with this mindset that you're gonna see and do all the things and participate in every event or activity that comes your way, it's just a recipe for burnout, and you are just gonna get so burnt out trying to keep up. So unless you have like a really strong sense of self and know the things that you like to do, know that your sense of worth is not based on how you show up in the world, then this is gonna be a really, really big drawback. And the final con is something that is probably the biggest deterring factor for most people, and that is the price. You can't have a discussion about New York City without talking about how friggin' expensive it is to just exist. And this is coming from someone who, again, came from San Francisco, where some of the highest rent prices in the country are. So I came into New York thinking that I was prepared for how much it was going to cost me. After living there for a year, I can tell you with sincerity that New York is more expensive than any other city in the country by a long shot. This not only goes for apartments, which yes, maybe you can get something for a similar price in a place like SF or LA, but the amount of apartment you get and the quality of apartment you get for that same price is going to be a lot less. You're gonna get a lot less space, a lot less lighting, as we talked about earlier, and just in general, the quality is not gonna be as nice. And even if you are trying to be frugal, even just the basic cost of living is a lot more expensive. There's a lot more inflation baked into groceries, thrift stores, the prices are more expensive. Even a coffee or a boba can cost upwards of $6, $7, $8 sometimes. And even if you want to make use of the subway, just doing one round trip somewhere is gonna cost you almost $6. So even if you wanna do something that's traditionally kind of inexpensive, like go to explore a new coffee shop in West Village, you're gonna have to pay probably $15 just to get on the subway, get there, get your coffee, hang out there, and come back. Having to pay that much just to do a simple activity can be a really big barrier for a lot of people. And one final point I want to make, this isn't really a con, but I do think it's important to bring up, and that's the fact that a lot of people come here to run from their problems. They see New York as this new chapter for them to kind of live out their main character experience and start over and just kind of recreate a life for themselves. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but a place is not going to change you if you're not ready to change yourself. And New York is not going to solve all your problems for you. So if you are coming here with that expectation, it is almost most certainly going to be a disappointment. Now, even though there are so many cons to living in the city, there is a good reason why so many people are still moving here year after year. And I think one of the biggest factors is that people are just so open to experiences and meeting new friends. I often hear when someone moves to a new city, it's really hard to break into friend groups or to kind of find your people. But because New York is made up of so many transplants and all the people who come there are there intentionally, they're much more likely to be open to meeting new people or experiencing something new. I mean, no one ends up in the city by accident, right? Again, it's expensive, it can be difficult, it's gritty, it's just tough to deal with in general. So if you end up there, it is for a reason. And this just gives the city a very unique energy. The second pro, which is something that I really like, is the walkability. If you're from another country, like a city in Europe or Asia, you might not be as impressed with this because walkability is just kind of a norm there. But in America, we really don't have walkable cities. We might have maybe like small sections where you can walk or neighborhoods, but to have the entire city's ecosystem actually connected to the point where you don't need to own a car is very, very unique to New York. And one of the coolest parts about this is because there is so much foot traffic, there is a huge density in local businesses. So if you go out to run an errand and you have to walk like a couple blocks, you're probably gonna see a few new restaurants or stores that you wanna check out. And that sense of discoverability and serendipity is something that a lot of people really appreciate about the city. Another great thing about living in New York is that you will almost guaranteed know at least one person who lives there, and even if you don't, there's always going to be people who want to visit you. So even if you are starting over and you don't necessarily have like your set friend group, there's a lot of opportunities to kickstart your social life instead of moving to somewhere else where you maybe actually just be starting from ground zero. There's also a ton of great resources here. Anything you could ever want in terms of food, shopping, doctors, career opportunities, the list goes on. You're gonna have the best of the best here. And it's very rare that you'll ever have to leave the city to do anything if you don't want to. Now, even though America in general is of course very diverse, and we have some very diverse cities like LA, or we have very diverse cities. What makes New York really special is, again, that density and that access for different people to be able to get around throughout the entire city and all the boroughs. At any given time, if you are in a certain cafe or walking down the sidewalk or at a park, you're gonna see people from all walks of life. Different ethnicities, different jobs, different backgrounds, people who just like look and think differently than you. Even though you can experience this to a degree in other places, it's usually usually going to be a little more segregated. Another thing I really like about the city is that because there are so many resources available to you, if you are not happy or you're not succeeding, then at the very least, you know you're not being held back by the place you're in. Whereas I feel like a lot of us can feel as if living in the suburbs or in a city we don't like is preventing us from succeeding in our career or our love life or just our happiness in general. But if you're in New York and you're not getting these things, you know that you just need to step it up. Like it's you, it's not the place. And I think that can be very liberating and also maybe a little intimidating for some people, but it's something that has really helped my perspective in my own life. And finally, and most importantly, it's New York. New York has long been this enigmatic bucket list item for a lot of people and a once in a lifetime experience that is a huge pro for a lot of us in itself. Now the question remains, is New York overrated? And the answer to that is, of course, it depends on your priorities. In Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, he talks about this concept called the shit sandwich. And his theory is that no matter how good something is initially, everything sucks eventually. Whether that be your career that you're really passionate about, your partner who you really love, there's always gonna be downsides. And the key to figuring out your happiness is not to decide what you are most passionate or excited about. It's to understand what deal breakers you can live with. And this is what he calls your favorite flavor of shit sandwich. Because if the cons of whatever you're doing are going to grate at you and annoy you until no end, then it doesn't matter how much you love it, you're gonna end up being miserable. And in the case of New York, this is harsh winters, the fast-paced, almost breakneck speed at which everything moves, how expensive it is, and how small and tiny your space is gonna be. If you can't live with any of these factors, then you're not gonna have a good time in the city, no matter how much fun it is or how great it is for your career. And of course, we have to talk about money because money is a huge factor in how much you are going to enjoy this city. Probably more so than anywhere else in the country. You don't necessarily have to be rich, but if you're making a decent salary, like over 6 figures, then a lot of the cons that I mentioned earlier start to disappear. You can order groceries and have them delivered instead of carrying them yourself. You can take an Uber when you're tired or if it's raining or snowing outside. You have a bigger, better luxury apartment that you actually like spending time in. And the general inflation of basic goods don't really affect you. It's something that you can absorb and still live your life. I think another really big factor in this conversation is the expectation that comes with moving to New York. If you are someone who expects to move and live your life like these New York vloggers or like a Sex and the City episode, you're gonna be disappointed. Again, unless you have money, which then why are you even watching this? Like, nothing is overrated for you. But this is the version of New York that I 100% believe is overrated and why a lot of people complain about the city in the first place. The New York that you see on YouTube or on TikTok is only 1%, probably even less than 1% of the people who actually live there. I actually watched this video recently of this native New Yorker on YouTube. She was acknowledging the fact that all of these New York influencers that you see online, almost none of them are from New York. They're all transplants and people who move there so that they could create content around the idea of living in New York. And because people who don't live in the city are only exposed to it by social media and by movies, you have this concept of a city that is filled with skinny, rich, light-skinned, beautiful people who all drink every weekend and live in West Village, but that is just what we see disproportionately represented by social media. And it honestly breaks my heart when people tell me that they've always wanted to live in New York, but it's too late for them because they're not in their 20s. Do you think everyone who lives in New York is in their 20s? And the other expectation people tend to have a tough time with is that they will go to New York on vacation, they'll be drinking and eating out every weekend and they think it's so great, and then they move there, realize they can't do these things all the time, and chalk it up to the city being overrated. So it's important to distinguish your experience somewhere between being on vacation and actually living there and deciding if it's a city that's going to be worth it for you in the long run, or maybe just a weekend out of the year. If you are going to move to New York, do it your own way. You don't have to live up to these expectations that you see online. If you want to be a homebody and stay home all day and not go out every single weekend, that's totally fine. If you don't want to eat out, don't eat out. If you want to rent a car and drive places instead of walking all the time, you can do that too. Having strong self boundaries is so important, especially especially when you're moving to a city that has a very strong sense of character. It is going to push you around if you don't know who you are. I mean, at the end of the day, if you are thinking about moving and you can make it work for you, I say just do it. You can always move back if you don't like it. It's not a permanent decision. Like the saying goes, we tend to regret the things that we didn't do more than the things we did do. Just know that the only guarantee that New York can give you is that you are going to learn something about yourself. And for that, the experience is priceless. Now, I just want to say as a quick disclaimer, I only lived in New York for a year. I'm not an expert. This is just my opinion, my anecdotal experience, what I've seen from friends and social media. Take this with a grain of salt, as you should everything on the internet. But I would love to know if you think New York is worth it, so let me know in the comments below. And of course, a conversation about New York would not be complete without talking about the influencer culture that has taken over the city, and to learn more about that, you can check out this video here.